and downs.
She was a model past her prime. He was a bartender nobody had heard of. And somehow, together, they lit up television like nothing before or since. Moonlighting wasn't just a show. It was a controlled explosion. It rewrote the rulebook on romantic tension, broke the fourth wall before breaking the fourth wall was cool, and turned a struggling ABC time slot into must-see television. But behind the glamour, the crackling dialogue, and the chemistry that practically melted the screen, nothing was easy. The budget spiraled, the stars fought. Scripts arrived hours before filming, and the moment audiences finally got what they wanted, everything fell apart. These are 20 weird facts about Moonlighting. And stay tuned for the bonus, because the episode that nearly bankrupted the production became the most celebrated hour in television history. Dim the lights. This one burns bright.
Just get out of the car.
But why?
And now I don't want you to look.
Number 1. Before Bruce Willis ever cracked a joke on camera, he was cracking open bottles behind a bar. In 1984, Willis was a struggling New York actor who had landed a handful of forgettable stage roles and a single fleeting television appearance that nobody remembered. He was tending bar in Manhattan just to keep the lights on, taking auditions between shifts, showing up tired, showing up hopeful, and mostly showing up to rejection. When the call came for Moonlighting, he almost didn't go. He wasn't sure it was worth the bus fare. The role of David Addison was supposed to be charming, fast-talking, spontaneous, a man who lived entirely in the moment and made it look effortless. Willis didn't think that was him. He thought of himself as a dramatic actor, someone with edge and weight, not a comedian. But he walked into that audition room, and something happened. He didn't perform the lines. He inhabited them. He riffed. He wandered off script. He looked directly at the casting director like she was the only person in the world and delivered a wisecrack so perfectly timed that the room went quiet before it erupted. Producer Glenn Gordon Caron reportedly turned to the room afterward and said simply, "That's the guy." No callbacks, no second opinions. Just one audition from a man who'd been mixing gin and tonics the week before. And suddenly Bruce Willis had the role that would change everything. Hollywood found him behind a bar, and he never looked back.
I wanted you as a partner for your name and your money, not you. You think I want some blonde ball?
Number 2. Cybill Shepherd didn't need the job. Not on paper, anyway. She had been a major force in Hollywood throughout the 1970s. A face on magazine covers, a Peter Bogdanovich muse, the kind of name that opened doors without knocking. But by the early 1980s, those doors had quietly swung shut. A string of projects that didn't land, a Hollywood reputation for being difficult, and an industry that had quietly moved on without sending a memo. When Moonlighting came to her, she wasn't desperate, but she was hungry in a different way. She wanted it back in. She wanted to prove something. The role of Maddie Hayes, the cool, composed former model turned reluctant detective agency owner, fit her like a glove that had been tailored to hide the scars. Shepherd brought something to Maddie that no amount of casting could manufacture. Real vulnerability wrapped inside polished armor. She knew exactly what it felt like to be underestimated. She knew what it meant to walk into a room and have people see the surface while dismissing the depth. And she used every bit of that personal history to fuel a character the audience couldn't look away from. The chemistry between Shepherd and Willis wasn't manufactured in a writer's room. It was two people with something to prove, circling each other in front of a camera, and the whole country watched the sparks fly. Moonlighting didn't rescue Cybill Shepherd's career. It rebuilt it from the ground up. Number 3. Glenn Gordon Caron had a vision so specific, so unusual, so borderline insane that ABC executives spent the better part of the first season trying to talk him out of it. Caron didn't want a standard detective procedural. He didn't want a glossy crime of the week format with neatly resolved endings and predictable banter. He wanted something alive, something that felt like it could fall apart at any moment and somehow held together through sheer will and wit. He pushed for scripts that broke storytelling conventions, characters who addressed the audience directly, episodes that shifted genres mid-story without warning, and dialogue so layered and fast that viewers would need to rewind just to catch what they missed. ABC said, slow down. Caron said faster. They said, play it safe. He said, make it dangerous. The network suits sat in their offices watching early cuts with furrowed brows and carefully worded memos expressing concern. But then the ratings came in, and suddenly all those concerns dissolved into handshakes and renewal orders. What Karen understood, and the executives were still catching up to, was that audiences were desperate for something that treated them like adults, something that assumed intelligence rather than pandering to its absence. Moonlighting didn't just entertain. It demanded participation, and in doing so, it invented a template for smart television that creators are still borrowing from 4 decades later. The man with the impossible vision turned out to be the only one seeing clearly. Number 4. The writer's room on Moonlighting wasn't a room. It was a war zone with a coffee machine. Scripts that would air on Tuesday were sometimes still being written on Monday. Pages arrived on set warm from the printer, handed directly to actors who were already in costume and already under lights. Willis and Shepard would scan their lines in real time, committing dialogue to memory between takes that were minutes away from rolling. It sounds like chaos because it was chaos, but it was also, somehow, part of what made the show electric. The dialogue had urgency because it was written in urgency. The performances had spontaneity because there was no other option. There was no time to over-rehearse. No opportunity to sand down the rough edges into something polished and safe. What you saw on screen was genuinely happening in the moment. 2 gifted performers reacting to each other with no safety net and no time to overthink it. Crew members have recalled standing on set watching Willis read a page of dialogue for the first time, then deliver it with such apparent ease and invention that everyone assumed he had been working on it for days. He hadn't. He'd had 20 minutes. Karen later said that the pressure was intentional to a degree. He believed that comfort was the enemy of great television. So he kept everyone slightly off balance, and that permanent state of controlled emergency became the show's secret engine, humming underneath every scene whether you noticed it or not. Number 5. The episode known as Atomic Shakespeare almost didn't survive the pitch meeting. In the 3rd season, Glenn Gordon Caron walked into ABC with a simple proposal, a full episode of Moonlighting, reimagined as a Shakespearean stage production set in Elizabethan England. No modern setting, no detective agency, no phones, no cars, no 20th century anything. Just Willis and Shepard in doublets and petticoats, speaking heightened language, wrestling with themes of desire and power, surrounded by a full period cast, performing original verse written specifically for the episode. The silence in that room after the pitch was reportedly something you could feel. Executives exchanged looks that said everything their mouths weren't saying yet. This was network television in 1986. The audience tuning in expected banter and crime and chemistry, not a iambic pentameter. But Caron pushed. He argued the show had earned the right to take swings. He said audiences would follow Maddie and David anywhere if the writing was strong enough. They let him make it. The episode took months of preparation, required an entirely separate production team, and cost a staggering amount for its time. When it aired, critics gasped. It was absurd. It was brilliant. It was both simultaneously. Viewers who had never read Shakespeare in their lives sat glued to their television sets, watching 2 modern television stars recite Elizabethan comedy with complete commitment. It is still studied in television writing programs today as one of the most audacious single episodes in the history of American television. Number 6. Bruce Willis launched a music career from the set of Moonlighting, and almost nobody saw it coming, including Willis. Between filming seasons, he recorded a rhythm and blues album called The Return of Bruno in 1987, built around a fictional documentary, suggesting Willis was actually a legendary but forgotten blues musician named Bruno Radolini. The whole thing was an elaborate wink, a joke that somehow became a genuine commercial success. The album went platinum. The single Respect Yourself cracked the top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. Willis appeared on television, performing with full conviction, not as a novelty act, but as someone who genuinely loved the music and understood the tradition behind it. Critics didn't know how to respond. Some dismissed it as a celebrity vanity project. Others grudgingly admitted the man had actual soul. The cast and crew of Moonlighting were reportedly stunned. They knew Willis as a performer, a physical comedian, an instinctive dramatic actor. Nobody had clocked him as a musician. But that was always the thing about Willis in this period. Just when you thought you had him figured out, he showed you another room, The music career didn't last forever, but it lasted long enough to prove the point. Moonlighting hadn't just made Bruce Willis a television star, it had made him a cultural phenomenon, the kind of person who could step into any room, in any form, and somehow make it feel like he belonged there first. Number 7. The tension between Cybill Shepherd and Bruce Willis was not invented by entertainment journalists hungry for a story. It was real, it was sustained, and it ran like a live wire underneath every season of the show. The precise origins of the friction are still debated. Some accounts point to early salary disputes, others to creative disagreements about character direction. Still others to the simple combustible reality of two strong personalities being forced into close proximity under enormous pressure for years at a time. What is documented is that the atmosphere on set was frequently difficult. Days when communication between the leads happened primarily through intermediaries. Scenes rehearsed in separate rooms. Moments of professional courtesy that felt more like negotiations than collaboration. And yet, when the camera rolled, none of it showed. Or rather, all of it showed in exactly the right way. The edge between Maddie and David, the way they pushed each other, the sense that something just beneath the surface was always about to crack. That wasn't acting. That was method by accident. Two people who genuinely found each other maddening, channeling that energy into characters who genuinely found each other maddening. The audience felt it without being able to name it. There was something true in every exchange that no amount of craft alone could have manufactured. Moonlighting proved, almost against its will, that the most uncomfortable sets sometimes produce the most captivating television.
Joe Men and $1 million mystery.
Number 8. Cybill Shepherd's pregnancy in 1987 didn't just create logistical complications for the production, it fractured it. Shepherd was expecting twins, and as the third season progressed, hiding her condition on screen became increasingly creative and increasingly costly. Camera angles shifted, wardrobe expanded, staging grew elaborate. Scripts were rewritten around her limited availability, and physical changes in ways that pulled the show's momentum sideways. But the complications ran deeper than blocking and costume. The pregnancy came at a moment when Moonlighting was already straining under the weight of its own success. Expectations had grown enormous, though the tension that had fueled the show's first 2 seasons was reaching a point where it either needed to evolve or risk feeling repetitive. Shepherd's pregnancy forced the writers to confront questions they might otherwise have deferred indefinitely. Shooting schedules collapsed, episode counts dropped, storylines that had been carefully constructed over months had to be abandoned or rerouted. Guest stars filled gaps. Standalone episodes appeared that felt disconnected from the larger story, and audiences, sensitive to the slightest shift in a show's rhythm, began to notice. They didn't abandon it immediately, but something had changed in the air. The effortless quality of those early seasons, that sense of a show running on pure adrenaline and refusing to tire, had started to strain at the edges. The pregnancy didn't break Moonlighting, but it was the first crack in something that had previously seemed unbreakable. Number 9. For 3 seasons, the central question of Moonlighting was simple and irresistible. Will Maddie and David finally get together? The audience leaned into their screens. The tension was meticulous, layered episode by episode with enough near misses and charged silences, and interrupted moments to feel genuinely agonizing. Glenn Gordon Caron understood something fundamental about desire, that the wanting is always more powerful than the having, and he built a show around that understanding with the precision of a watchmaker. When Maddie and David finally slept together in the 4th season premiere, the country celebrated. Ratings for that episode were extraordinary. Think pieces were written. Television critics declared it a landmark moment. And then, almost immediately, something strange happened. The show began to collapse. Not dramatically, not all at once, but unmistakably. The tension that had powered the whole enterprise simply had nowhere to go. The push-pull that made every episode feel vital had been replaced by something murkier and harder to sustain. Caron later said, he always knew the relationship would change the show's chemistry, that this is the inherent trap of the will they won't they format. You spend years promising an answer, and the moment you deliver it, you've spent the currency that made the whole story worth watching. Moonlighting didn't die when Maddie and David got together, but it never again found the electric certainty of those early seasons, and the audience felt the absence like a missing note in a song they knew by heart. Number 10. The show was hemorrhaging money at a rate that genuinely alarmed ABC executives, and for a while, they couldn't do anything about it. Moonlighting was the most expensive show on the network. Budgets that had been set in the early planning stages bore no relationship to what was actually being spent by the second and third seasons. The Atomic Shakespeare episode alone cost roughly 3 times a standard episode budget. The rapid-fire dialogue required more rehearsal time and more takes than conventional television. Karen's refusal to compromise on production values meant that corners that other shows quietly cut were being left stubbornly intact. Sets were built with full ceilings, a nearly unheard-of detail in television at the time, purely because Karen wanted the camera angles to feel cinematic. Music rights were purchased at feature film rates. Guest stars were paid handsomely, and the constant script delays meant that filming days stretched into nights, over time accumulating at a pace that made network accountants reach for their antacids. At one point, a quiet calculation was reportedly done by an ABC executive about how many advertising dollars Moonlighting was generating versus how many dollars it was burning, and the numbers were uncomfortably close. The show was a ratings triumph and a financial stress fracture simultaneously. It survived because the audience demanded it, but it was always, in some sense, a production living beyond its means. A beautiful object that cost more than anyone could quite justify, and continued anyway because some things are worth the price. Number 11. Long before streaming made binge-watching a cultural habit, Moonlighting invented appointment television through sheer force of personality. In the mid-1980s, Americans would rearrange their Tuesday evenings around the show. Restaurants reported dips in dinner reservations. Phone lines went quiet. People who had never watched the same show twice in a row became devoted, almost protective viewers. ABC knew it had something unusual on its hands when viewer mail began arriving, not just complimenting the program, but expressing what could only be described as emotional investment in fictional characters. Letters begged the writers not to let Maddie and David get together. Other letters begged them to stop waiting. Some were addressed directly to the characters themselves, as though the line between story and reality had softened past usefulness. Nielsen tracked the numbers, but the numbers barely captured the phenomenon. What Moonlighting had created was a shared national conversation, happening weekly in living rooms and offices and diners across America. Before social media existed to measure cultural heat in real time, Moonlighting generated that heat the old-fashioned way, through storytelling so compelling that people couldn't stop talking about it until the next episode arrived and gave them something new to argue about. Number 12. The show's habit of breaking the fourth wall was treated as a gimmick by early critics who couldn't quite locate it within the existing vocabulary of television. Characters addressing the camera directly, referencing the fact they were on a television program, acknowledging the crew, winking at the studio audience that wasn't there. It made reviewers uncomfortable because it didn't fit. Drama didn't do that. Comedy did it sometimes, but Moonlighting wasn't purely comedy either. It lived in a genre gap that had no name yet. What critics missed, and audiences instinctively grasped, was that the fourth wall breaks weren't tricks, they were trust. Karen was telling the audience, "We know you're watching, we respect that you know you're watching, and we're going to play with that awareness instead of pretending it isn't there." It was a fundamentally different relationship between show and viewer, one built on shared intelligence rather than maintained illusion. Television had to wait another decade before this sensibility became commonplace. Shows like The Office and Fleabag would eventually receive enormous critical praise for doing precisely what Moonlighting had been quietly doing since 1985, talking directly to the audience like they deserved to be included in the joke.
High points and low points.
Number 13. Al Jarreau recorded the show's iconic theme song, and that smooth, elastic melody became as recognizable as the show itself within a single season. But the music was more than a signature. It was a statement of intent. Jazz-inflected, romantic, slightly playful, a little melancholy underneath the brightness. It told you exactly what kind of show you were about to watch before a single actor appeared on screen. Jarreau reportedly recorded it quickly, almost casually, in a session that didn't feel momentous at the time. That is often how the most enduring things happen. No ceremony, no announcement, just a musician and a microphone and a melody that happened to be exactly right. The theme earned Giroux a Grammy nomination and introduced his voice to a generation of younger listeners who might never have found him otherwise. For many viewers, that opening music became inseparable from a specific feeling, the particular anticipation of settling in for something that would be smart and funny and surprising, that would reward your attention and then ask for a little more. A television theme that genuinely reflected its show's soul is rarer than it should be. Moonlighting had one from the very first episode. Number 14. Curtis Armstrong appeared in the show's supporting cast and quietly became one of its most beloved presences, delivering a performance as the agency's beleaguered accountant Herbert Viola that turned a minor role into something audiences genuinely looked forward to each week. But what made Armstrong's casting remarkable was how completely it defied expectation. Coming off Risky Business and Revenge of the Nerds, he had been typecast as the awkward comedic sidekick, the reliable punchline in someone else's story. Moonlighting took that established persona and gave it unexpected heart. Viola wasn't just funny, he was loyal, earnest, occasionally wise, and completely sincere in a show where sincerity was frequently the most subversive quality a character could possess. Armstrong later said, "The show gave him room to find dimensions in a character type he might otherwise have played on autopilot. Karen trusted his instincts and let him build Viola from the inside out, rather than simply filling a function. The result was a supporting character who outlasted his designed purpose and became essential to the show's emotional texture." Sometimes the best casting decision is finding someone who was underestimated elsewhere and simply letting them work. Number 15. The episode titled "The Dream Sequence Always Rings Twice" aired in the second season and presented the same story twice, once in the style of a 1940s black and white film, noir, once from a different character's point of view, with an entirely different visual language and dramatic tone. It was formally adventurous in a way that had no real precedent in American network television. The episode required two completely different production designs, two different cinematographic approaches, and performances calibrated to distinct genres that demanded separate rehearsal processes. Willis leaned into the noir with obvious relish, finding in the hard-boiled register a prototype for the kind of physical, wry heroism that would define his film career just a few years later. Critics who had been politely impressed by Moonlighting suddenly became loudly enthusiastic. This wasn't just good television. This was television interrogating its own possibilities, asking what the medium could hold if nobody insisted it stay inside familiar boundaries. The episode is frequently cited by television scholars as a pivotal text in understanding how the 1980s began to produce programming that aspired to something genuinely cinematic, not just in visual scale, but in conceptual ambition. Number 16. The show's influence on Bruce Willis's film career was so direct and immediate that it almost feels too clean to be true, but the timeline doesn't lie. Die Hard went into production in 1987, while Moonlighting was still airing its third season. The studio had originally envisioned a more conventional action star in the role of John McClane, someone with established physical credibility in the genre. Willis was a television actor, a comedic one at that, but producer Joel Silver watched him on Moonlighting and saw something the conventional calculus was missing. Not just the physicality Willis had quietly been demonstrating in the show's more demanding sequences, but the wit, the self-awareness, the ability to be in genuine danger while still making you smile. McClane needed to be a hero you could laugh with, even while fearing for his life. Moonlighting had been building that precise quality for 2 seasons. Silver made the call. The studio was skeptical. Audiences worldwide were eventually not. Die Hard redefined the action genre and launched one of the most durable film careers of his generation. It started because a television show proved something about a bartender from New York that no audition tape could have demonstrated. Number 17. Shepard and Willis were nominated for Golden Globes and both won. Shepard took the award for Best Actress in a Musical or Comedy Series. Willis won Best Actor in the same category. It was the first time in the history of the Golden Globes that both lead performance awards in a television category went to co-stars from the same show. The ceremony was warm and celebratory, the kind of industry moment that photographs beautifully and smooths over complications. But those who worked closely with the production noted that even the shared triumph couldn't fully paper over the tensions that had been building through the second season. Willis reportedly gave a gracious speech. Shepard was luminous. They posed for photographs with the polished ease of two professionals who understood that the public version of their partnership was worth protecting regardless of what was happening privately. The awards validated what audiences had already decided. These were two of the most compelling performers working in American television at that moment, whatever the personal friction between them. Sometimes the work transcends the conditions that produced it. Moonlighting's awards history is proof that what happens in front of the camera can be entirely true, even when what happens behind it is considerably more complicated. Number 18. The series finale aired in 1989 to an audience that had already begun the process of moving on, and it satisfied almost nobody. The show that had once commanded the full attention of American television ended not with a dramatic conclusion, but with something closer to an exhausted acknowledgement that the story was over. Storylines that had been gestured toward for seasons remained unresolved. The Maddie and David relationship, which had been the engine of the entire enterprise, concluded in a manner so deliberately ambiguous that viewers were left genuinely uncertain about what they had just watched. Karen had long since departed the series, driven out by the accumulated pressures of budget battles and production chaos and the grinding creative difficulty of sustaining something that had originally been built on spontaneity. Without him, the show had continued but lost the specific intelligence that made it feel inevitable. The finale was watched by millions and largely forgotten by morning. It is a melancholy footnote to one of the genuinely great television achievements of its decade. What Moonlighting deserved was an ending as audacious as its best episodes. What it got was a quiet door closing on a story that had once filled every room it entered with light. Number 19. Decades after the final episode aired, Moonlighting's reputation has only strengthened. Television academics use it regularly as a primary example in discussions of postmodern narrative structure, generic hybridity, and the evolution of the romantic comedy in American popular culture. The show appears on virtually every serious critical list of the most influential television programs ever made, frequently cited alongside The Sopranos and The Wire as a series that fundamentally altered what the medium understood itself to be capable of. For a show that ran only 5 seasons, produced fewer episodes than a single modern streaming drama season might contain, and ended without resolution, that legacy is extraordinary. Younger writers and showrunners cite it as formative. Actors who grew up watching it describe specific performances as touchstones. The Atomic Shakespeare episode is required viewing in several university film and television programs. What began as a network gamble on an untested premise, 2 mismatched leads, an impossibly ambitious writer, and a budget that scared the accountants, became one of the permanent landmarks of American television. Not because it was perfect, because it was alive in a way that most television, then and now, simply is not. Number 20. Glenn Gordon. Karen left the show he created under circumstances that were never made entirely public, but whose outline was clear enough. The pressure had become unsustainable. The budget crises, the talent conflicts, the physical and creative exhaustion of producing something at that pitch of intensity for year after year without adequate support. He departed midway through the 4th season, and the show continued without him, as networks will insist on doing when the ratings still justify the investment. But something essential departed with him. Karen had been more than a showrunner. He had been the show's nervous system, the source of its specific intelligence and its refusal to be ordinary. Without that central nervous system, the body kept moving for another season, but it moved differently, more carefully, more conventionally, more like television. Karen went on to create other projects, some successful, none quite capturing the particular lightning of those early Moonlighting seasons. He has spoken about the show with a mixture of pride and something that sounds like grief, the way you might speak about a great love that ended badly. You don't regret it, you couldn't have done otherwise, but you carry the shape of it with you always. Bonus fact: the prop detective agency sign that hung above the Blue Moon Detective Agency set was quietly stolen from the soundstage before the show finished production. Nobody claimed responsibility. Nobody was formally accused. It simply disappeared one day between setups, lifted by someone who understood that the object carried weight beyond its function, that it was a piece of something that had mattered. The crew noticed its absence and chose collectively to say nothing. Because in a show built on things that crackled and surprised and refused to behave the way they were supposed to, a stolen sign felt less like theft and more like tribute. Somewhere out there, in a house or an apartment or a storage unit, belonging to someone who once worked on those impossible, beautiful, chaotic sets, that sign is probably still hanging. A quiet monument to a show that burned too bright to last, and bright enough to last forever.